The American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine is the world's largest society of physicians and scientists focused on longevity, and since the first meeting in 1991, our international membership of over 30,000 have come to understand that aging is not inevitable, aging is a treatable condition, practical immortality, health spans and lifespans beyond 120 may be available to us as soon as 2029. A4M doctors specialize in new, innovative and cutting-edge technologies, all designed to improve both healthspan and lifespan. I hope you will join us on our mission to end aging-related diseases.
Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Ron Klatz with the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, our sponsor. Immortality Now has been brought to you for many years, and we're bringing some of the most influential people in the healthcare profession right to your screen to talk to you about what's new and breakthrough and exciting in the world of anti-aging medicine, longevity medicine, preventive medicine, functional medicine, etc. And we're very happy to have today Dr. Thomas Lewis from MIT. And Dr. Lewis, tell us about your background.
Right, Ron. Dr. Klatz, I've known you for a long time. Really respect what you've done in terms of promoting functional integrative medicine. So kudos to you. So I graduated from MIT with a degree, a PhD in chemistry. Then I went to the Harvard School of Public Health and got cert in toxicology and nutrition in the public interest. And then I met a very interesting ophthalmologist at Harvard who really showed me the path to health, because in the eye, you can actually see disease real time, neurological and vascular disease. And he pointed me on the right path. And most of what I've done since then is use my background to really discern what Dr. Tremp and Dr. McCulley, the pioneer of the homocysteine theory, were doing at Harvard to create a program for longevity, which is my company's called Health Revival Partners. Health Revival Partners, so healthrevivalpartners.com. And we do corporate wellness. We do direct to consumer functional consults, but our mainstay is measuring general risks and physiological risks from the blood with extreme precision and accuracy, because most diseases are smoldering chronic, not raging fires. And the nuance of that is very important in understanding longevity. And
you have some new books out. Actually, you have quite a few books, but tell us about your latest books.
So, I wrote a textbook on Alzheimer's called The End of Alzheimer's. Same title as Bredesen. Ours published first, but it's more of a textbook in academic press. Quarterback Your Own Health, Uncovering Chronic Inflammation and Hidden Infections. I just published a new book called Cancer is an Infectious Disease. It's not only an infectious disease, but that has to be considered. And then I'm just finishing a very large manuscript called Health Freedom Lost. It was stimulated by COVID, but what the thesis is 100 to 1,000 years of misinformation in health that's made our population unhealthy, which turned a minor virus into a pandemic, and all the ramifications of that.
We also have Carol Petersen, who's rather internationally famous compounding pharmacist, as our co-host. Hello, Carol.
Hello. It's my pleasure to be here. And I heard Dr. Lewis on Mercola, and I said, we've got to talk to him about the work he's doing. It's exactly what we're interested in both ways, both looking at what kind of markers you're using for aging and looking at markers for COVID. You have a COVID panel. We'd love to hear more about each of these and how you use this for self-assessment and how you use it to go forward with patients and help them.
Right. Be very, very glad to touch on that. So, I call what I do precision and accurate measurement of labs from a chronic perspective, not a flaming acute perspective. So my normal limits are based on early mortality risk for every single biomarker. In the standard of care, reference ranges or reference intervals are based on populations.
Mm-hmm.
And as the population gets sicker and sicker, the reference range reflects that. So like If you get a lab today and you're considered healthy, 50 years ago, you might have been considered unwell based on that exact same marker. So reference ranges are not science-based, and they're not even standardized. Our ranges are based on well-published multiple studies for a given marker, C-reactive protein, white blood cells, fibrinogen, uric acid, you name it, that shows where the first indication of early mortality is indicated in good studies using reference intervals, p-values, a real sophisticated algorithm. But at the end of the day, it's very simple. Functional doctors understand that there are normal, reference ranges and then functional normal ranges. And I've just put more science behind that. And I think the reason why this is important, if you look at the standard of care in a traditional doctor, they will say, interesting, like Hyman's paper out of Cleveland Clinic, interesting, but anecdotal and not science-based. I would argue that what we actually do is far more science-based than the standard of care. We just haven't sort of commoditized it yet and made it more well known and available. But how my ranges are so much tighter than the standard of care, and 90% of disease is chronic, and that's the CDC. That's not me. So that's how we measure things. But I call it evidence-based medicine with a purpose. And since I was trained by two brilliant mechanistic doctors at Harvard, everything I do is tied to mechanisms of disease. So in the standard of care, there are 77,000 plus diagnostic codes. It's a crazy number. Can't count that high. In reality, in my opinion, 90% of these conditions are driven by 5 mechanisms. And I'll quickly run them down. It's poor micronutrient status from poor diets, behaviors, or poor absorption, digestion, absorption. You are what you absorb, not what you eat. And it's the micronutrients. These are the carpenters of your body that do all the repair and recovery. So it's all tied to, are you absorbing, taking in and absorbing micronutrients at an adequate density? The next is what I call thrive versus survive, or you could call it fight or flight. But when we are stressed, and we're putting, stress is good, but too much stress, we're allocating resources over here and we're vulnerable over here. So that's a very underappreciated but important mechanism. The third is stealth chronic infections and toxicity, but mainly infections. And the number one source in aging for infection is not like Lyme disease or staph or the flu. These things don't matter. They come and go, but Lyme disease, but periodontal pathogens. And periodontal pathogens like Treponema denticola is a spirochete. Lyme, Borrelia burgdorferi, is a spirochete. So I would argue that Lyme symptoms in aging is more often caused by oral pathogens from cavitations, root canals, poor oral care, things of that nature. The next mechanism is
Are you recommending, therefore, mouthwash, with brushing 3 times a day, or?
That's a great question. I have a 76-year-old gentleman that just presented objective evidence to us. He's been my client for 2 years. That when you age, it's called long in the tooth, which really means short in the gums. This gentleman has seen about a 75% diminution in recession. In other words, his gums have recovered at the age of 76. And what he is doing, flossing, hydroflossing, water picking twice a week with some povidone iodine, not every day, because the biofilms don't reform instantly. It takes a few days for the biofilm, the pathogenic biofilm, housing project to reform. So you don't want to mess with your microbiome in your mouth. That's why I won't do sort of a Listerine or anything like that on a daily basis. You need that. And, the hydroflossing, and then I will use salt on a toothbrush, preferably a Sonicare, to brush, and it highly stimulates the gums. See, what happens is the earliest formation of gingivitis, here's the tooth and here's the gum, you start seeing a little separation. So if you can use a pressure washer, if you will, and get the antiseptic like iodine down there. And I don't recommend peroxide. All the nurses I work with say peroxide slows healing. So peroxide's a one-time treatment when you have like a scrape, a boo-boo, you do something like that. But when you're doing continuous oral care, like I said, the povidone 10% solution, a little bit of that in your water flosser. And the other thing that my good man Robert used is this called deoxyrinse, which is a weak version of a chlorine dioxide solution, and you swish that around. I have a whole protocol on that, and he does that quite regularly. And literally, his gums, the recession reversed. And if recession reverses, it only means one thing: you are managing the bacteria that was inhibiting the rebuilding of new tissue. So, great question, though, Ron.
Did this accompany changes in his biomarkers of infection, though? I mean, it's one thing to have beautiful gums and beautiful teeth. It's another thing to have a beautiful immune system that's going to take you that extra 10, 20 years of extended lifespan.
Exactly, Ron. And so this is, in pollution control, we call it source reduction. So, if you're exposed to a toxin in an environment, it's intermittent, right? But infections grow. And I recommend everybody read, I better pull it back here, Paul Ewald's book, Plague Time, written in 2000. It explains pretty much everything. So when someone works with me or Dr. Carter or any number of the functional doctors that I have on my team, that we will always do an oral DNA test or another genomic test for oral pathogens. We'll recommend they get a 3D scan to look for cavitations and deal with that through I have a functional periodontist on my team. But then we use the white blood cells to tell whether it's happening. It's gone systemic. I mean, a red blood cell goes through your heart every minute, so there's a good chance it goes systemic. But we do have immunity out there, so it doesn't necessarily mean it takes hold like a hobo, So might go from place to place. So in my opinion, so let me just give you my thought on that, Ron. So here's the standard of care. White blood cell counts are normal. Here's my normal based on early mortality. But then in the middle of my normal is an optimal. And I want everybody to have a white blood cell count of 4,400. Count is relative, cells per unit volume. And a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is the absolute, you get neutrophils as percent and absolute, the absolute neutrophils divided by the absolute lymphocytes. And a perfectly healthy, sort of a quiescent innate immune response or a system will have a white blood cell count of 4,400 and a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio of approximately 1.3. If I look at mortality, you want to be between 4,000 and 5,700 with a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio of 1.1 to 1.5. But a perfectly healthy individual, which is attainable, and that's how you live to 120, is your neutrophil to lymphocyte 1.3 and your white blood cell 4,400, period.
Thank you for admitting that. It's so good to hear. It's so good to hear other people echoing the discussions at the American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. And we really firmly believe that life expectancies of 120 are in fact possible.
All right. It's real. And Ron, I'm going to make an audacious claim because it's you. We know each other. We've had lunch and dinner together and, interacted in various ways. And I'm driving home from visiting my daughter in Massachusetts on Sunday, 13-hour drive. And I'm listening to lectures and I'm listening to Mercola talk to Morley Robbins about iron and ferritin. And I think that's an extremely important anti-aging measurement. And I've developed the ferritin to iron free iron ratio. And it's simple, but a lot of people aren't doing it. And you want that to be around 0.6. Ferritin to iron ratio. Okay. But Robbins talked about the accumulation of iron in the liver and other tissues. And I think fundamentally that could be a component of our biological clock, the accumulation of this, because iron is a fundamental atom. There's nothing more fundamental than atoms and their subcomponents. It's
Strongest pro-oxidant, isn't it?
It's a pro-oxidant.
Yes.
It's paramagnetic. So it has some very interesting properties. And what I think is happening with iron is when it accumulates in soft tissue, it is a catalyst for growth of organisms. So it's called anemia of chronic inflammation, or I really call it anemia of chronic infection. And I'll refer to my mentor, Dr. Tremp, who said, look, the richest fishing grounds in the world are the Georges Banks. Why? Because the Iron Range of Minnesota and Sorel, Canada has iron mining areas flow out from the St. Lawrence into the upper Atlantic. And that iron catalyzes microbial growth. So you have the whole life spectrum up there. But we know, like when I had COVID in December, you know, your iron should be around 100. I'll just pick numbers. Your iron should be around 100 and your ferritin should be around 100. My iron went to 14. I had a temperature of 103. I went and got labs the day my temperature was the worst because I was curious. And my ferritin was like 2,000.
Yeah.
Why? Because my body was trying to save my life by reducing the ability of the infection to replicate. It needs iron for that. So it put my iron as low as it could to keep me alive, and threw all the rest into ferritin that becomes unavailable for the infection. So I think when you have iron accumulating in tissue, it completely congruent with Charles Mayo, the founder of the Mayo Clinic, that talked about oral pathogens and either coined or promoted or popularized the term of a focal or a localized infection. And I'm very familiar with localized or focal infection. An oral thing is an oral, an oral problem is a focal infection. Alzheimer's, Judith McCloskey out of Switzerland. Alzheimer's is spiroketosis, published in 1993. So you have a local infection in the brain. That's the difference between Parkinson's, ALS, and Alzheimer's. It's where that local infection is. Arthritis is a local infection, most likely periodontal, in the joint, because periodontal disease infections are bone eating. That's why a two-dimensional X-ray shows bone loss. Okay, so now I'm beginning to understand why potentially that these local or focal infections can occur in specific tissue due to the way iron might accumulate in this tissue. And there's a professor, I don't know where, but it was in that conversation, that can measure your sort of tissue-based iron with MRI technology. Anything that's a little bit, that has a different spin. It's not just carbon and hydrogen. You can see that in a different type of MRI. So that's out there. But
you had mentioned that there's 77,000 diagnostic codes. These are ICD-10 numbers?
ICD-10 codes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. How do you figure out anything? How can you possibly coordinate and collaborate the different symptoms and the different laboratory and the different response to therapeutics with 77,000 different diagnostic codes? It's mind-boggling.
That's why they want the more codes, the better, because you have more individual new drugs. It's like, what about these old drugs? And we can repurpose the drug. No, we're going to add more codes, because I think they're only like 20,000 plus or minus a few thousand with ICD-9. So now they have an opportunity for another 50,000 drugs.
Right.
It's pretty amazing the way the system has changed since the 1960s, 1970s, when I think we were at the peak of diagnostic healthcare in the U.S.
Yeah, and so my last mechanism, my fourth mechanism, was stealth infections, is number 3, perpetual low-grade inflammation. The brain is rather unique in that if someone gets a concussion, they may be they may have their brain in an inflamed and dysfunctional state for years. Let's say
Mhm.
I'm a hockey player. I bang my head and bang my elbow with the same force. My elbow may be better in 2 weeks. My brain may not be better in 2 years. So there's something about microglial activation in the brain. So if you're going to treat Alzheimer's or other types of neurological conditions, that may be an infectious process. It may be stimulated by the insult that sort of creates a deficit in that tissue. But you better have a very good program to down regulate inflammation. And then my last mechanism is lack of autophagy or autophagy, however we want to pronounce it, due to a sedentary lifestyle and or constant eating. Never giving yourself a break, because intermittent fasting is a great way to get rid of senescent cells. Another thing is, so the iron serves two masters, and anybody who's interested in longevity needs to donate blood. But you need to test your iron, ferritin, and your other iron parameters, transferrin, UIBC, things like that. But you want to give blood because it's been shown that when you hook an old mouse up to a young mouse, blood-wise, they kind of harmonize in the middle. The older mice gets younger and the younger mice gets a little bit older. But what they find is if you just give blood, not only are you getting rid of iron, but you're getting rid of sluggish senescent cells. And my colleague who told me about this said it's like an old department chair. It's like they've passed that usefulness and all they're doing is getting in the way. And that's what senescent cells are like too. So giving blood, and Mercola now is giving, because he gets a phlebotomist comes, he's giving 2 ounces of blood every week or something like that. And he's calculating that based on that, he's actually getting ahead of the curve of removing iron from his soft tissue where it shouldn't be. So that's why.
That's all very interesting. Now, with your lab and you're following how many people's blood parameters right now?
The question is how many different types of blood parameters?
Yes.
No. How many people, how many clients are you following their blood on a regular basis to achieve optimal?
Right now I have right around 2,000 people that are running the labs either every 3 to 6 months.
Hello, thank you for watching this portion of Immortality Now with Dr. Thomas Lewis. We've recorded 2 parts. We found Dr. Lewis so interesting. So stay tuned for part 2 of this programming. Also, Dr. Ron Klatz and I have put together a new URL called longcovidanon.com. Please join us there and post your concerns and solutions to long COVID. Thank you.